Today on Teach Me How to Vegan.
So there's this other myth that I feel like you've actually broken down already through what the things that you've been saying, but this myth comparing plant protein versus animal protein, that animal protein is superior, or, the protein you're getting from your whey protein powder or from a steak or something like that is going to be superior to the protein from beans and rice or bananas or whatever. But I feel like you've already broken that down.
Exactly. But I will say, but that definitely stimulates some other great points that I'd like to make, and some other studies, scientific studies that I'd like to point to. We have head-to-head trials where they'll put people on a rigorous exercise program and they'll have them supplement with whey protein, and they'll compare that to whatever kind of plant protein, rice protein, hemp protein, whatever it may be, pea protein. And they show that people are able to gain the same amount of strength and they're able to put on the same amount of muscle, regardless of whether it's whey or whether it's plant-based protein. And so because of that, we know that you can't say animal-based proteins are superior, and it doesn't come without all the baggage.
Welcome to Teach Me How to Vegan,
a podcast where we explore how to switch to a vegan diet.
I'm Tony, a health educator, fitness instructor, and plant-based eating program manager for Animal Protection of New Mexico.
I'm Mickey, a stay-at-home homeschooling mom and vegan cook who likes to play in the kitchen.
Our family stopped eating meat in 2007.
And we went vegan in 2016. Now we like to share with others what we've learned.
Thanks for joining us.
Let's get started.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Today, we're talking all about protein. So if you've ever had a question about protein in general, specifically for protein and plant-based or vegan diets, this is definitely the episode for you. Today, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're giving Mickey the day off. So apologize in advance. She won't be gracing us with her brilliance, but we are excited to welcome a very special guest. As promised, we're bringing on a registered dietitian so that we can take our nutrition discussions a lot more deep and get a lot more into detail with those. And I don't think we could have picked a better dietitian. Quickly to introduce our guest, Gabriel Gaarden, MPH, RDN, LD, is a registered dietitian with a master's degree in public health. Given that nutrition is the number one contributor to disease, disability, and premature death, Gabriel has a steadfast dedication to sharing the best in evidence-based nutrition science. The food we eat is undoubtedly one of the most powerful and effective tools for promoting improved human and planetary health. The crux, the answer, the keystone, whole plant foods, full stop. Welcome to the show, Gabriel.
Tony, thanks so much. And thanks for, what's the right word? Thanks for throwing down that great intro that, of course, I wrote up and sent to you.
No, I love it. I love it. It's you. Like, I know you on a personal level, and it's like, it's the perfect intro for you. On the show, we talk a lot about lots of different topics, and everybody kind of does this vegan thing their own way. Everyone has different resources, different access and all of that. And I know that you understand all of that. And so, I love that about you too. But at the end of the day, you are like whole foods, plant-based champion.
Right? That's right, man. I mean, that's how I originally got into this whole movement, right? I mean, I'm just as passionate now about the animal rights and the environmental aspects of, eating a plant-based vegan diet. But my original introduction to the plant-based movement was specifically through the lens of health, health and health promotion, optimizing our health. And that came from years of struggling with some chronic digestive problems myself. So I had a lot of personal motivation because I dealt with a lot of personal pain and just struggle around food and digestion and my health. And so that was a big, people say pain is a great short-term motivator. I don't think it works long-term. Long-term, I think we need to look toward things like love and other forms that are more positive reinforcers for keeping us going with lifestyle changes long-term. But pain is a great short-term motivator. It was the thing. It was one of my primary motivators to continue to seek new information about health, and of course to being open to trying new things. And so that was what got me involved in the plant-based movement. And then the more I learned, of course, the more passionate I became about all the different areas that deal with why eating a plant-based diet is great for not only us but for our planet. And of course, all the animals that we share this space with.
Yeah, your story sounds pretty similar to mine. That's what started me off, was struggles, health struggles, pain. But I love what you said about, pain being a short-term motivator, because that's exactly where I'm at. Like I've, struggled with my relationship with food over the years, and food addiction in some senses, self-diagnosed. I'm not sure all the ins and outs, but so I struggle with that. And I noticed that, whenever I start to fall off, so to speak, I never fall off being vegan, because it's morphed into an ethical thing, a moral thing. But sometimes, I'll fall off with and lean more towards the vegan junk food and get away from the whole foods. And then that pain comes back in, and then it kicks me back into gear. Oh, my asthma's kicking up again. Allergies are flaring up, and then I get back on the wagon. So you're absolutely right. The love has changed me into being vegan forever. But, I'm working on that love of myself, keeping me on the more whole foods path. And definitely the love for animals and the environment keeps me on the vegan path anyway.
Sure thing, man. I'm the same place. I heard somebody put it beautifully, speaking to the ethical among us, who choose vegan first and foremost, and in some cases primarily or only because of the ethical standpoint, which is a great reason to go vegan.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody, I can't remember who it was, I was reading an article, because of course nutrition's my passion, it's my obsession, it's what I love, it's what I spend my time consuming, even when I'm relaxing, walking my dogs, running, going for hikes. I'm still listening, diving into nutrition podcasts, reading nutrition articles, all of that. Somebody put it great. They said, being an ethical vegan is more than just being ethical to animals, it's being ethical to yourself. And you brought that up when you talked about, loving ourselves. Yes, we love animals. And for that reason, we could eat Beyond Burgers, or we could even eat Oreos and Dr. Pepper.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is, or the issue or the crux there is those foods aren't equal to eating beans, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. Those are the foods that are going to really give us the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak, when it comes to improving our health. And nonetheless, the environment too, right? Beyond Burgers are way better than eating beef. There's no doubt about it, both ethically, also from a health standpoint, and also from an environmental standpoint. You get all things when you go plant-based, but all three of those things pale in comparison to eating the source of the foods that are highly processed in that Beyond Burger. And I have nothing against Beyond Burgers. I eat them on occasion too. But it's a highly processed food, and it's less environmentally friendly. It's less healthy than going straight for the whole plant foods.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to eat I think the primary thing in a Beyond Burger are yellow split peas. It's what they use as the primary source of protein in those. And a lot of these companies are looking at diversifying. It just has to deal with how they source these things. Impossible Foods primarily uses soy protein, and Beyond Burgers primarily use pea protein from yellow split peas. But that just has to do with a supply, chain thing. Those are the proteins that there's enough of a supply of that they can get them. But I think long term, a lot of these companies are looking at diversifying their sources of protein, because that'll be better both from an environmental standpoint, and I think it'll also be good just that these proteins are coming from different foods. But certainly environmentally, if it's not just coming from like a monocrop, it's going to be a good thing. But it all has to do with where they can get enough of these beans so that they can, it's a big supply. I mean, they need a lot of beans to extract the proteins to make these burgers.
Right. Yeah, very well put. And yeah, that's great conversation. So let's, while you're speaking about protein, the protein from the beans, let's dive into protein, where we wanted to go deep in the sauce about the protein this episode. So, in the past, whenever we've talked about it, we've kind of brushed on some nutrition topics. And, my kind of thing for vegans is, when it comes to protein, like, don't worry about it.
Exactly
what I tell most people: if you're generally healthy and you eat enough calories and a varied diet, then don't worry about it. So there's truth to that, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, couldn't be stated any better, Tony. Okay. You don't have to be, it's great in many cases to get information from a qualified health professional, a registered dietitian like myself, or somebody working at a university who specializes in things like nutrition biochemistry, or just the study of nutrition overall. it's going to be great to get information from those people because they know the most about the in and outs and what's happening in the body and why we need certain nutrients and why we need those certain nutrients in certain concentrations or amounts, each day or over the course of multiple days or a week or a lifetime or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it doesn't take a nutritional scientist or a registered dietitian to understand the basics of protein. And that's that, yes, we definitely focus way too much on it. There's a lot of fear mongering around protein that, people aren't getting enough or that they need to eat certain sources of protein. For example, animal-based sources of protein because they have complete proteins. We can dive into that myth. But the bottom line is, yes, nobody really is suffering from protein deficiency in the Western world where we have plenty of food to eat and that food's coming from varied sources. Like you say, if we're not just eating one food, and even then we have, I've seen people thrive on just eating potatoes alone. People can check out a guy named Andrew Taylor. He's got a great program called Spud Fit, Spud as in potatoes. Check out his website. He's a great guy. He went on a potato only diet. That was the only food he was eating, people, for a whole entire year. And did he get unhealthy? No, the opposite happened. All of his numbers improved. His cholesterol, his triglycerides, his blood sugar control, his weight came way down because he was obese. He was morbidly obese. He lost all the excess body fat. He started thriving. His energy levels went through the roof. A bunch of other health problems that he had just started to, diffuse and go away. And now he runs a great program where he helps other people who dealt with similar problems like him. He would say he was a food addict. And of course, you can't eliminate food like you can eliminate other addictive substances like drugs and alcohol.
Right.
Those things you can live without, but you can't live without food. And so we said, how can I get as close to eliminating food as possible without eliminating it entirely? Because nobody could do that forever, because of course we'd starve to death. That brings up fasting, of course, too. We can go a long period of time on water alone, and there's a number of proven health benefits to that. But of course, that cannot be done permanently. And so he said, well, the closest thing I can do to eliminating food is just eating one food group. And so he ate potatoes for a whole year. And it says, and I'm not recommending anybody do that. There's no reason to have to get that extreme. That may be good for some people, or not for a whole year. You may do that for a day or a few days or maybe a week or two to kind of reset and recalibrate. But that being said, the human body doesn't need all these complex things and protein powders and supplements and all these different things. We are a machine that can use a very simple sources of fuel. We don't have to overcomplicate things, and we can thrive. And so, yes, we definitely stress too much about protein. And I'll let you get back to your next question if there's something to take the conversation further.
I love that that you brought that up, because I'll tell people that too. As long as you're eating enough calories, you could eat nothing but potatoes, you get enough protein, and that's proof right there. And the varied diet is kind of the key, and like the whole foods. Because I'll always tell people too, if you eat enough calories but worth of just Skittles, you might not get enough protein that way. But
exactly,
with potatoes, that's a whole food.
But Skittles aren't real food, right?
Right,
they're a highly processed, fractionated food product.
Exactly.
Just like oil, olive oil and coconut oil. Some people love those things, but again, they're a highly processed, fractionated food product. They're not whole food. And so if we're eating predominantly whole foods, because whole foods have all three macronutrients, always. They're in varying concentrations, right? Obviously, meat has a higher concentration of protein than does a banana, but also beans and hemp seeds and things like that also have much higher concentrations of protein than do bananas. That being said, beans and bananas all have all three of the micronutrients: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. They just come in varying amounts. And so some people think about eating apples and oranges and bananas and even brown rice as, oh, those aren't protein foods. And so they don't even think about them getting any protein. But every whole plant food you eat, like I say, it has all three macronutrients, even if one or two of those macronutrients is in smaller concentrations. And so little bits add up throughout the course of the day. All the fruit you add up is going to add up to several grams, if not dozens of grams of protein throughout the course of a whole entire day. And then, of course, the higher protein plant foods. And people need to think about legumes, number one. beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils. And then, of course, our high protein nuts and seeds, specifically hemp seeds and Mediterranean pine nuts, are super high in protein. But all nuts and seeds are good sources of protein. Whole grains are great too. And dark leafy greens and other cruciferous vegetables are wonderful also. Now, of course, they're so low in calories, those dark leafies, that they don't give you huge amounts of protein, because it would take eating huge amounts of them to get large amounts of calories and therefore large amounts of protein. That being said, the concentration of protein in those foods, even though they're so low in calories, they're still very rich in amino acids being the building blocks of protein. And so when people think protein on a plant-based diet, I want them to think first about legumes, and then second about dark leafy greens and other cruciferous veggies. Or not second, should be, top three: legumes, high protein nuts and seeds, and then our dark leafy greens and other cruciferous veg. They're awesome sources of protein, all sorts of other phytochemicals that are going to be great from a repair and growing standpoint when it comes to building muscle or maintaining muscle mass.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And because I feel like legumes are one of the biggest things that we need to focus on. And that's what I'm always telling people, because it's like, if you need protein, beans; if you need iron, beans; if you need phosphorus, beans; right?
Beans are one of the biggest superfoods there is.
You could check off
people
so
don't
many
think about
boxes.
them being a superfood because they're so simple, and it's of course it's a mainstay of all the longest living populations around the world, the people that of the blue zones. And they're also a mainstay when we look at epidemiological research and we look at lifespan, how long people are living. And we also look at health span. So not only how long are we living, but how many of those years are disease and disability free, where we're actually living well in our bodies and we're not dealing with chronic disability and disease. Beans are a cornerstone in so many different aspects of research. Beans show up over and over again as decreasing our risk for disease, promoting a longer and healthier life. And of course, because they're so rich in so many nutrients, protein included, they're going to be great from a muscle mass standpoint. Now, most of us aren't bodybuilders. Most of us aren't professional athletes. We don't really need to be concerned with putting huge amounts of muscles on our body. From a lifespan and a health span standpoint, that may not be a good thing. Really big people like NFL, like men from the NFL tend to have really short lifespans. If you look at the average NFL linebacker, these are kind of like the biggest people in our society. They tend to live it's something like 53 years. That's the average life for an NFL linebacker. And so when most people think about being big and huge, because we associate big, huge people with being masculine and strong and dominant and alpha male, right? Well, yeah, it's one thing to be an alpha male. It's another thing to, die at 50 years old or have your first heart attack at 45 or 50. That's no kind of life that I want to live. And I don't think most other people want to live that life either. And so, yes, muscle mass is good. It's certainly important for decreasing our risk of falling and having fractures in later age, because the more muscle mass we have, we tend to have better balance. We tend to have better agility. More muscle mass equals more strength, and that's going to help us in later life. So we want to maintain muscle, but we don't need these freakish amounts of muscle that football players and that bodybuilders have. There's no reason for needing that much muscle.
Good points. So, I want to get into some of the myths and discuss them a little bit deeper. Before we get there, I'm wondering if you could just give like a quick definition and explanation about like what protein is and how our bodies use it. This was like, understanding this was really helpful for me to like get over my obsession with protein and kind of start to break down some of that information that had been pounded in my head over the years of growing up, understanding truly how our bodies use it. So could you kind of do that briefly?
For sure. Yeah. So protein, of course, is more importantly, is made up of amino acids. Those are the building blocks of protein. If you think of an individual Lego, because Legos are easy to visualize and conceptualize, an individual Lego piece is like an amino acid. And proteins are like the castles or the dinosaurs or whatever we might construct out of a whole set of Legos, right? The proteins, once a huge number of amino acids link together in long chains, they will then fold up into these three-dimensional shapes, and those are proteins. And so the things that we build with Legos are like proteins. And of course, then proteins do, millions of things. They make up our muscle tissue and tissues of our organs and many different things. They make up enzymes that help to catalyze all these different chemical reactions in our digestion and other things in our bodies. And so they do a huge number of different things. And those are the proteins that are made up of the individual long chains of individual building blocks called amino acids. But importantly, we don't absorb proteins from our gut into our bloodstream and then use them in our bodies, right? Any protein that you consume, be it from cow flesh or from cow's milk or whey protein in a whey protein shake, or be it from beans or a Beyond Burger or a pea protein shake, being a more highly processed form of plant foods, just like whey protein, we have pea and rice and hemp protein powders that we can consume in the form of protein supplements. Mm-hmm. All those proteins in our digestive process have to be cleaved, which is another word for like cutting or breaking down. Those proteins have to be cleaved into amino acids before they actually get absorbed and then, distributed in our bodies throughout our bloodstreams and processed in our livers and all these different things, and then actually reconstructed into proteins by our bodies. So we're not taking protein from a cow or from a black bean and then just using it as is for the different things that we need in our bodies, because there's, who knows, I don't know off the top of my head, there's probably thousands, if not maybe even more, but certainly probably thousands of different proteins that our body needs to manufacture. And so they don't come in the right formats when they're coming from the food that we're eating. We got to break them down into amino acids, individual building blocks, and then our bodies will build what it needs. So that being said, since it's not going to be used in its original form anyway, it doesn't matter where those amino acids come from. They're just amino acids. They're just building blocks at the end of the day. The body doesn't care whether they came from rice or black beans or cow's milk or a steak. Body doesn't care. It's just amino acids. Mm-hmm. And the whole point here is, as long as we get enough of all these amino acids to meet our body's needs so that it can manufacture the proteins that it needs, and so that it can repair and repair our muscle after we exercise and build or just maintain muscle. Most people aren't even exercising enough and hard enough to build muscle, right? You have to regularly endurance train, and more specifically resistance train, mm-hmm. at a high enough level to actually cause the levels of micro tears and damage, these little levels of damage to your muscles. It will actually initiate the whole process that will cause us to develop bigger and stronger muscles. Mm-hmm. You have to do the exercise first and foremost, and at a sufficient intensity in order to repair and build muscle. And again, the body doesn't care where the amino acids are coming from as long as there's enough of them. And it's so easy to get enough of them. Eat a primarily whole food diet, right? And make sure that you're concentrating on some of these high protein plant foods. Beans first and foremost, because it's not realistic for somebody to just eat pounds of hemp seeds or different kinds of nuts. For one, they're really high in fat. And we know that fat is the most calorie dense of the macronutrients. You can compare it to protein and carbohydrate. And so if we eat really high fat diets, you're more likely to eat in the excess of calories that you need, and you're more likely to gain weight. And so it's good to look at beans because they're such a low fat, really kind of low calorie or moderate calorie source, but that's also high in protein. And of course, our dark leafy greens and other veggies are going to be great as well.
You've already mentioned, plants have protein, all plants have protein, because you said all whole foods have all three macronutrients, so protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And so that's just one myth right off the bat, because even, when I was doing my undergrad in nutrition classes, they kind of taught us that all plants didn't have all the amino acids, that they only had some amino acids. And that's why you had to combine with other foods. And, the first time that I saw in a book, I think it was The Starch Solution, a chart that mapped out different plant foods and the amino acids that they have. And I saw that they had all the essential amino acids. I just felt like my whole life was a lie, like.
Yeah, we've been told a lot of misinformation.
Yeah,
we've certainly been given way too much misinformation, and that has a lot to do with the food industry. The food industry exists to make money.
Right.
It doesn't exist to keep people healthy, or to promote health. And there's not necessarily a problem with that. I mean, these companies and corporations exist to meet their bottom line, and that's to make money and specifically to make profits. And that has to do with how our system works. Every company has shareholders, and in order to support the prices of their stocks and the success of their company and the bottom line of their shareholders, they need to increase profits over time. And so it's a profitability game. It's not a human health focus or standpoint or game.
Sure.
And so we just need to know that going in. It's not that the food industry is out to get us or out to make people sick or whatever. It's just they're out to make money. That's what they do. And so we as consumers have to make educated, informed decisions about what we consume. And that's why people like you and me are doing our very best to try to give people evidence-based, high-quality information so they can use that to make informed choices, about what they decide to put in their mouths and what they decide to spend their money on. And of course, like you say, every whole plant food is going to have carbohydrate, protein, and fat. Now, of course, those amino acids that make up their proteins will vary in their concentrations. And so that's where that whole myth came from about complementing proteins and about plants being essentially incomplete proteins. And of course, that's not true. I think there's 20 amino acids that our body will use to create proteins. 9 of those are considered essential. And what the word essential means is it's just something that our body can't make on its own. It has to get from our diet. It has to get from the outside, from food. So that's what's essential. Same thing with essential fatty acids, right? The omega-6 and the omega-3. We have to consume a certain amount of those essential fatty acids because our body can't manufacture them on its own. We have these 9 that are considered essential. And all 9 of those amino acids are in every single plant food that you could list. You could go through all the fruits, vegetables, grains, whole beans, whatever. Every whole plant food is going to have all 9 in addition to those other amino acids. It even has the other non-essential amino acids, but it has all 9 of them. Now, some plant foods are going to be a little bit lower and usually maybe 1 or 2 of those amino acids. That being said, we're not just eating those one foods in isolation. Like you say, we recommend a varied diet. That's just going to be good for all kinds of different things, our digestive health, our microbiome, so many different things. We want to eat as many different whole plant foods as possible, as realistic for your lifestyle, for your budget, right? We don't want people to think, oh my God, if I don't have the money to go buy purple cabbage and, the curly kale and dinosaur kale, which is called lacinato kale and all these different things. We don't have to overcomplicate things.
Right.
Whatever works for your lifestyle and your budget, we want to work within that to eat as many different whole plant foods as possible. And we know that if we're getting enough calories in the day, something we've already mentioned, I could eat an individual food, say brown rice. Yes, brown rice may have a little bit smaller concentration of 1 or 2 of those 9 essential amino acids. But if I need 2,000 calories in a day and I get 2,000 calories of brown rice, again, I'm not recommending this. Who wants to just eat brown rice all day? But if I eat those 2,000 calories of brown rice, even those 1 or 2 amino acids that are in smaller concentrations or lower concentrations in brown rice, they would still get up to the daily recommended minimums for what I need for any one of those individual 9 amino acids. Now, the others that are in higher concentration, I'm going to be way above the minimum threshold, say for the 7 or 8 others that come in higher concentrations in rice. But if it has 1 or 2 amino acids, it's a little bit lower. I'm still going to get up to that minimum threshold for what my body needs to maintain health. And so again, it's a total myth. We don't need to combine foods, but we still recommend a varied diet because it's going to be easier for us to get way beyond what our body needs in terms of protein and other nutrients. But a varied diet is also going to help support all those other things. It's going to make sure that we're getting enough calcium, enough phosphorus, enough zinc, enough of whatever different macro or micronutrient you could name. The more varied your diet is, the more complete our diet's going to be from a complete nutritional profile and perspective.
And it's going to be a lot funner for you, right? Like,
it tastes better, right?
Nature had to figure it out. Like, you don't want to just eat brown rice all day. What would go good with brown rice? How about some curry? Lots of vegetables in there. How about some tofu or some chickpeas? And then you have your varied diet. And
exactly. So nature makes sense, right? We combine these different foods and makes them taste better because at the end of the day, basically nobody long-term is going to consume a diet that's not convenient, familiar, and enjoyable, right? We need to be familiar with the food. And again, that happens with practice. There's many studies to show for people that say, oh, I don't like kale, or I could never go plant-based. It's like every dietary choice that we make is all based on habit, right? The only reason you like candy bars and you like, ribs and McDonald's double cheeseburgers is because you've developed a habit around eating those foods. You can do the same thing with health promoting foods. You just have to give them enough tries. Now, I know there is a difference. McDonald's cheeseburgers are so highly processed and they're so chock full of fat, salt, and sugar, which are addictive substances, that those foods become more addictive. And so that's qualitatively, it makes that food different than eating pinto beans and brown rice or with, some kale or some Brussels sprouts. That being said, practice makes all of these things easier. The more we give our taste buds and our palate an opportunity to try these foods, the more likely we are to develop an affection, or I don't know if affection is the right word, but to develop a love and an enjoyability for these flavors. So keep giving them a try. Don't give up right away. Practice makes perfect. You got to practice these things in order for them to become convenient, familiar, and enjoyable.
Yeah, and that was so well put. We actually talk about that a lot on the podcast too, that you have to make your food those three things, enjoyable, convenient, and make it a habit, right? And
exactly.
And
it's all
also,
habit.
Yeah, it's so well put too, because I have a family member that's always telling me that they don't like this or that. Like recently it was like, I was like, maybe try some spinach, fresh spinach. And they were like, oh, I don't like spinach. And I was like, well, it's weird because every time I make spinach, you like it. Remember that lentil stew we had that time that you said was so good that has spinach in it? Stuffed shells, that's one of your favorite foods. You ask for it all the time. That has spinach in it. And it was like, oh, okay. I just thought I didn't like it, so I was going to avoid it at all costs. And it's like, if you can change your habit, have the realization that you do like this food. You just aren't preparing it in ways that you like it,
Yeah, with kids sometimes, they think about the food as just like spinach, in and of itself. But but you're talking about, oh, I put it into this wonderful this tasty pasta dish, or I put it into this great stew, or whatever it may be. And, that's one of the main things when parents are having trouble sometimes incorporating new foods with their kids. Registered dietitians or chefs will tell them, hey, sneak it in some other way, disguise it, incorporate it with other foods. Because when it can be masked, or when it's just incorporated into other things, then kids aren't seeing it as this individual, oh, it's spinach, or oh, it's broccoli, right? They're getting to taste it in combination with other flavors, with sauce, with different textures, and then, of course, with different herbs and spices. And that can really be a great way to open people up to giving things a try that in isolated, circumstances, they may look at spinach and just say, oh, I don't like spinach. Well, it's like, hey, just try preparing it in a different way. Just try it with a little bit of sauce, your favorite sauce. It's like everybody likes something with a little bit of sriracha,
Right.
or a little bit of ketchup, or whatever it may be. And those aren't health foods, like sriracha and ketchup. Those aren't health foods. But if those sauces get you or your family or your children to eat more beans, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, then hey, add a little bit of whatever sauce you love, man, because the most important thing at the end of the day is eating more whole plant foods. We don't have to stress about the other details so much.
I like that. And I'm totally in agreement with that too. Whatever gets you to eat more of the foods, right?
Exactly.
So there's this other myth that I feel like you've actually broken down already through what the things that you've been saying, but this myth that comparing plant protein versus animal protein, that animal protein is superior, or the protein you're getting from your whey protein powder or from a steak or something like that is going to be superior to the protein from beans and rice or bananas or whatever. But I feel like you've already broken that down.
Exactly. But I will say, but that definitely stimulates some other great points that I'd like to make, and some other scientific studies that I'd like to point to. And that being said, yes, people will want to say they're superior because there is some difference between plant proteins and animal proteins. We talked about they both have all the essential amino acids, but of course, animal proteins are somewhat different qualitatively because they tend to have all of the essential amino acids in very complete concentrations, right? So whereas, people will talk about plant proteins are limited, right? They're limited in certain amino acids. And there is some truth to that. Like I said, brown rice, if you look at one or two of the essential amino acids in brown rice, they're in slightly smaller concentrations if you compare them to the other 7 or 8. Whereas if you look at beef, it's got, it's high in all of the 9 essential amino acids. But like I said before, there's absolutely no stress. If you're eating a predominantly whole food diet, whole plant food diet, that is, and especially when it's varied, there's absolutely no issue that you're going to get more than enough of all of your essential amino acids. And again, the body doesn't care where they're coming from. As long as you have enough of them, the body's going to use them as individual building blocks. Those amino acids don't say, oh yeah, I'm an amino acid that came from beef, and so therefore I'm superior to the lysine or to the methionine or to the, whatever the essential amino acid is that came from brown rice or black beans. The body doesn't care. It's just going to take that amino acid and it's going to use it to make whatever proteins or repair your muscle tissue or whatever it's doing. That being said, also, we have head-to-head trials where they'll put people on a rigorous exercise program and they'll have them supplement with whey protein, and they'll compare that to whatever kind of plant protein, rice protein, hemp protein, whatever it may be, pea protein. And they show that people are able to gain the same amount of strength and they're able to put on the same amount of muscle, regardless of whether it's whey or whether it's plant-based protein. And so because of that, we know that you can't say animal-based proteins are superior, just because they are replete or just because they have high concentrations of all of those amino acids. Again, if you're getting enough amino acids, and specifically if you're getting enough of one of those, which is a branch chain amino acid, it's called leucine. Again, if you're eating a predominantly whole food diet, you're concentrating on those high protein plant foods that we mentioned, beans in all their forms, whether, legumes in all their forms, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and any kind of lentils, right? There's dozens of different kinds that you can choose from, different colors, different flavors, different textures. They're all wonderful. Beans, high protein nuts and seeds, concentrating on hemp seeds, of course, being the highest. And then there's a form of Mediterranean pine nut that's just enriches protein as hemp seeds. I don't know how to find them though. I get some organic pine nuts from Costco. They only have about half the amount of protein, still a good amount of protein, but half the amount that hemp seeds do. And so, but again, I use hemp seeds every day. I get them at Costco. They are a little bit more expensive than other things. And so if budget is a thing, you don't have to worry about eating hemp seeds. You're still going to get way more than enough protein if you're eating lots of different beans. You're eating some, dark leafy greens, which I mentioned, and some other cruciferous vegetables. And then any other kind of nut and seed is still going to be a great source of protein. But like I say, hemp seeds are they're all stars. And so if you can afford them, if you have a Costco membership, they're a much better deal. Mm-hmm. You can get a big bag that's going to last you for many weeks, if not, a month or more. Just sprinkle a couple tablespoons in your morning smoothie, on your morning oatmeal, or even on a salad, right? Or in other baked goods. There's so many different ways that you can squeeze in hemp seeds. They have a mild flavor. And they're just so rich in protein that it's just like you can easily get an extra gram of protein or an extra 10 grams of protein in any meal or smoothie by just sprinkling a few tablespoons. We're talking hardly anything here of hemp seeds. They're incredible, right? Mm-hmm. And I even will put beans because like we say, beans are so rich in protein, but they're also good for all these other reasons that we maybe can get into another podcast. They're great for a microbiome. They're rich in this thing called resistant starch, which is this incredible compound. It's so good for many different things in our bodies. And so there's a million different reasons that you should eat beans, not just for their protein. But I'll put white beans because they have a little bit more mild flavor than, say, pinto or black beans. I'll put a can or half a can of white beans in addition to my hemp seeds in a smoothie, and it's going to be a nutritional powerhouse, and it's going to have a ton of protein. And then I don't even have to use protein powder because protein powder, like we said, it's highly fractionated. It's one of the most processed foods on the planet. There's nothing wrong with consuming a little bit of it. But just like with ketchup or, added oil or salt or sugar, these things that we should consider kind of condiments to be used sparingly in a diet to add a little bit of extra flavor and excitement to our food. But whole plant food should be the centerpiece, the cornerstone of our diet, right? Protein powder should be used the same way. People should not think of them as a cure-all, as a magic bullet, as something that, I got to get my protein or else, They're highly, highly processed foods, ladies and gentlemen. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing wrong with using them. Look for better ones, like Vega is one that I can recommend. It's a great source of plant-based protein. I think Orgain is pretty good. But look for ones that have fewer ingredients, right? Because the fewer ingredients, the better. There's another one of, and again, no affiliations here. I don't have relationships to any of these companies, but I use this supplement called Complement, and Complement also makes a great protein powder that literally only has 5 ingredients. It's like the least processed protein powder on the planet. And so that's another one that I can recommend for people who are thinking, well, okay, Gabriel, I get it. You're big on beans and hemp seeds and green leafy vegetables. And you say we're going to get enough of everything that we need if we're eating a lot of whole plant foods. But I still feel like I want that insurance policy. I want a little bit extra because, I'm really trying to get ripped and I'm trying to get jacked and I'm trying to put a lot of muscle on. And so, yeah, if you want to add a little bit of protein powder to your diet, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm definitely going to recommend plant-based protein powders over animal-based protein powders like whey. And we can go more into that in 1 minute. But again, try to get the ones with fewer ingredients because a lot of these have added sweeteners, artificial flavorings, all kinds of different processed ingredients, right? And you'll see that on the label. Look at the ingredients. Most of them you won't be able to understand, and they'll just be a huge list. They'll be like a paragraph. Whereas Complement, literally, it's just like chia, hemp seed, a bunch of ground up stuff that's rich in protein. It's got like 5 different ingredients, a couple different seeds, and maybe, 1 or 2 other things. And so, and like I say, Vega is a pretty good one. But again, use maybe 1 or 2 scoops of protein at most in a day. That's going to give you an extra 15, 20, 25 grams of protein. If you use that in addition to the many grams of protein that you're going to be getting from all your whole plant foods, even the grains and the fruits included, like I say, everything's got some, and it all adds up throughout the course of the day. You're going to find that you're getting way more protein than you need. The average omnivore gets almost twice our RDA for protein, or our recommended dietary allowance for protein every day. And guess what? The average vegan and vegetarian is right behind them. We get like 1.78 or something. We get almost twice the recommended, dietary guidelines, what they recommend. And that's more than probably we really need, right, to maintain good health. That being said, we want to make sure we're getting enough protein because we know it's important for helping to maintain our lean muscle mass. And that's great for all kinds of different things in life, especially in later life, right? When we're trying to avoid fractures, we're trying to avoid falling and getting hurt when we get old. And so, but yes, like I say, the average vegan even is getting almost twice of what the recommended minimum is every day. And so we really don't need to stress a lot about protein. And we have those head-to-head trials to show that you can put just as much muscle mass on with a plant-based protein supplement as you can with an animal-based protein supplement. And it doesn't come without all the baggage. The baggage that comes with eating whey protein is it's really high in branched chain amino acids. The branched chain amino acids are associated with a number of health issues. Also, it doesn't have any of the other junk that dairy has in it, the hormones, the antibiotics that may be in trace amounts in those products. And it doesn't have any of the, other junk that comes in dairy that, essentially we should be avoiding if possible.
Yeah. And speaking about protein powders, real quick, I had also read an article about the different metals that are found in different protein powders. I don't know if you've heard about that. Mercury, and I don't even remember what else, but it was just eye-opening when they sampled various of all sorts of protein powders on the market. And so you don't know what else, other byproducts you're getting in those as
exactly
well.
Like I mentioned, great point, Tony. These are highly processed, highly fractionated food products, right?
Yeah.
They're products. They're not whole foods. And we don't know all of the different things that are coming into them. And there are better companies, like I say, Complement. There's only 5 ingredients, and I believe in this company. I buy their, I spend good money for the supplement because I think they're transparent. They do a lot of independent verification with third parties to actually verify, what the ingredients are, because we know supplements, guess what? It's an unregulated industry. And protein powders fall into that same category. It's unregulated industry. It's not, the FDA doesn't approve it like it approves drugs from the pharmaceutical industry. And there's a number of problems with the pharmaceutical industry, but at least there's regulation there, and and those drugs have to get approved. Dietary supplements do not need, there's no regulation and there's no approval. And so at least some companies go out of their way because, just like you said, the studies that you talked about that showed that there were heavy metals in protein powders, there's usually all kinds of different things in different supplements that people eat, whether it's a vitamin supplement, other micronutrients, collagen, all the different things that people might take. These things can be devoid of the things that they promote having or containing, and they can be laced with all kinds of stuff that isn't listed on the bottle. And that's the problem. And so again, that's not that people should stress a million times about what protein powder they're consuming if they decide to consume one, or what supplement they're consuming and what brand it's coming from. Yes, it's great to look for. There's a number of different organizations, I think, different seals that you can look for on, products that state that it's been approved by a certain organ, regulating body or whatever it may be. But the whole point here is, hey, since protein powders are highly processed, again, we should either eliminate them altogether because we know we don't need them to get enough protein, or if people still decide that they want to take out that insurance policy and they want to make sure they're getting a little bit extra just to make sure they're getting enough or they're getting more than what they need to build muscle, say, again, concentrate on whole plant foods. That's where your health comes from long-term. That's where your long-term performance is going to come from. And consume less of the protein powder. And then you won't have to worry as much about whether it's laced with heavy metals because you're consuming little or none of it anyway.
Right. Circle back too, because earlier you were talking about white beans and hemp seeds. And I just wanted to also say that I use those to add to kind of change the texture of foods. Like they're also magical to make things creamy without using dairy or milk or cream or anything like that. You can puree up some white beans and then add them to a soup or something to make it creamy. That's how we make broccoli cheese soup at home sometimes.
Exactly.
So you're adding more nutrition and you're getting the texture that you want. And the same thing with the hemp seeds. We use them to make ranch dressing, like a Whole Foods version of a ranch dressing where you just soak the hemp seeds and blend them and you get that creamy texture. And then you add the spices, which is what makes ranch taste good anyway. Right? Dill and whatever else. And so, it's like the best of both worlds. So I just wanted to throw that in there when you were talking about those nutrition powerhouses.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many different ways. The more we learn, right, we feel, if we put in a little bit of effort, of course, now you can't just go to the store and buy a great whole food plant-based version of a ranch dressing. It just doesn't exist right now. Right, and, again, the plant-based, market and food industry is booming. And more great alternatives for a lot of things like meat and dairy are popping up all the time and will continue to pop up hopefully over the next 5 to 10 and even further into the future, 5 to 10 years and further into the future.
Another, kind of myth or misperception that I hear a lot is people associating protein with energy. So I've heard some people, they say, I went vegetarian and then I just had no energy and it must be the protein. Or I'm getting amped up for this big fitness challenge I'm doing today, so I'm loading up on protein for breakfast, things like that. And so, and I'm always like, can we break this down as to like, does protein give us energy? Or if not, where do we actually get our energy from?
Yeah, that's a great point. To some extent, yes, protein is a macronutrient. So it's giving us energy in the sense that scientists, and nutritional researchers use energy synonymous with the word calorie. So in common layperson speak, we think about calories as giving us, the 2,000 or the 2,500 calories that we may need in a day, depending on the person. Of course, every person's different. Calories that we need to, maintain our weight, or if, of course, if we're in a calorie deficit because we're trying to lose weight, lose fat, or in a calorie excess because we're trying to gain muscle mass or gain weight. Protein is a form of energy. It has 4 calories per gram, and carbohydrate has 4 calories per gram. And then fat has more than double that. It has about 9 calories per gram. But in terms of giving us the energy, like you're using it, of course, like the average person will use it, is it giving me the energy to feel energized, to get up, to get out of bed, go for a walk, to get to work, to use my mind to problem solve, to do all the things that I need to do in a day. To some extent, yes, because again, it's giving us calories and we're deriving the energy that we need from the calories and the other nutrients that come from our food. But protein is not some kind of a fix-all when it comes to energy, right? Our primary energy source for doing the work that our body does, moving our muscles, moving our body, using our brains, which are one of the biggest absorbers and users of energy in our body. They're these incredible vacuums. They suck up energy like crazy. They use so much energy. is carbohydrate, right? That's our primary fuel source in the body when it comes to powering the activities that we need to do. Now, that being said, yes, I know if there's anybody who's a keto fan or who's heard of the keto diet or following a keto diet, they'll say, yeah, but what about me? I'm fat adapted, right? I'm on a keto diet that's very low in carbohydrate, and I'm doing just fine. And yes, you can convert into something that we call ketosis, and that's where your body is predominantly burning and using fat for energy as opposed to carbohydrate. But that is not something that me, as a nutrition professional, somebody who specializes in this area, that is not something that I would recommend people doing long term, right? So ketosis has been shown to have a number of health benefits short term, but the kind of ketosis that I would recommend, the most health promoting, from a health promoting standpoint, would be water fasting ketosis. Right. So that's where your body still goes into ketosis, where you're burning predominantly fat for fuel, but you're doing it because you're not consuming any energy, not because you're consuming a ketogenic diet that's really high in fat and low in carbohydrate and may have a low to moderate amount of protein. You could certainly do nutritional. So there's fasting ketosis and there's nutritional ketosis, and you could do either. And there's good arguments for stating that a plant-based ketogenic diet could be a health promoting way to live. But again, from a practical standpoint, I wouldn't recommend that people do it long term. Again, we have no long-term data to demonstrate whether or not it's safe in humans. So from that aspect, I cannot recommend it as a nutrition professional. I can only recommend things for which we have good long-term data. Number two, I just don't think it's practical. It's not as easy to follow a ketogenic diet as it is to follow a whole food plant-based diet that's rich in all three macronutrients. Now, it's going to be much more rich in carbohydrate because plant foods are naturally much higher in concentration in carbohydrate compared to their concentration of protein and fat, excluding things like hemp seeds and other nuts and seeds that have so much fat. They're going to have mostly fat and then some protein and a little bit, or lots of protein and a little bit of carbohydrate, right? But most of your fruits and your vegetables and certainly your whole grains and your beans are going to have much higher concentrations of carbohydrate than are your nuts and seeds. And that's a good thing. Like I say, glucose is the primary energy source. That's a single a single carbohydrate molecule is a glucose. That's what our body breaks down, just like we break down protein into amino acids to be absorbed and utilized by the body. We break down carbohydrates, which are long chains of sugars, into individual sugars known as glucose before we utilize them for energy in the body. And again, glucose is your primary energy source. And no, you don't need to eat a lot of protein to have energy. That's just a total farce. Number one, you need to get a good night's sleep. If you want to have good energy long term, you need to concentrate on something called sleep hygiene, right? That's the way that we take care of our health around sleep. Secondly, the healthier our nutrition is, the more energy we're going to have throughout the day. A lot of those high protein animal-based foods, at least, also come packaged with a lot of other things. You're not just getting protein in those foods. You're getting saturated fat. You're often getting even trans fat, the fat that we know is most dangerous. Saturated fat, very dangerous for our health. Trans fat's even worse. They're both associated with increasing our LDL, or our lethal. That helps people remember LDL. The L, you can say, stands for lethal or bad cholesterol. And that's going to increase our risk from heart disease, the number one killer in the United States, right? And so we want to increase those sources of fat. If you're eating eggs, if you're eating beef, if you're eating any kind of dairy, not only are you getting a lot of protein in those foods, you're getting a lot of saturated fat, and you're even getting trace amounts of trans fat. Both things that we want to minimize as much as we can in our diet, if not eliminate altogether, right? A little bit of saturated fat's fine because we get those in plant-based foods too. But we're not going to get the trans fats. We're getting those in animal-based foods and highly processed foods is where we find the trans fats. We want to avoid those altogether if possible, the trans fats. And those fats are highly associated with something called insulin resistance, which is going to help prevent us from being able to actually get the sugar in our blood after our meals out of the bloodstream and into our body cells, where it can be used for energy to do the the work that those cells need to do. And so we want to reduce those things so that we can maintain good blood sugar levels, so that we don't have blood sugar levels that are out of whack all the time, that are going to be disrupting good, consistent energy levels throughout the day, right? Good blood sugar control. We want to control the amount of fat in our diet, but specifically saturated in trans fats. And those are coupled often. They come packaged in a suitcase along with all those high animal-based proteins, right? So just another good reason to limit or eliminate altogether those sources of animal protein in our diet.
Yeah. And speaking of insulin resistance and blood sugar control, because I was going to ask, a lot of people who are diabetics think that they should switch to a high protein diet or,
and a high fat diet.
Right. Something like that. So, it sounds like you wouldn't necessarily recommend that for diabetics.
Definitely wouldn't.
Because of what you were saying.
It pales in comparison. Yes, if somebody's adopting a higher protein or a higher fat diet and they're reducing the amount of carbohydrates in their diet, it's going to appear that their blood sugar is under better control. And it is going to be under better control. We have data to show that if diabetics on like a standard American Diabetic Association diet, or a diet that's lower in carbohydrate and has moderate or high amounts of protein and moderate to high amounts of fat, because they're consuming such little carbohydrate, and even on the keto diet, right, where they're consuming an extremely low amount of carbohydrate, because the carb is so low, yes, it does keep our blood sugar levels low. And so high fat proponents or high protein proponents or keto proponents will say, look, my blood sugar levels are so under control and they're so low, this must be good for my health. The problem is it's only masking the underlying issues that aren't being dealt with, that aren't being solved on those high protein, high fat, high ketogenic diets. And that is that the underlying insulin resistance, which causes poor blood sugar control in the first place, is still there. And often it's getting worse on a ketogenic diet. And again, we have good scientific data to back this up. And so that's why somebody on a keto diet, if they go one day and they eat some carbohydrate, even if it's from a healthy whole plant food source like brown rice or beans, their blood sugar levels can go out of control or can go way up. And that's because they have so much underlying insulin resistance in their body, because they're consuming so much saturated and trans fat, right? Specifically the saturated, because most people aren't getting trans fat in very high amounts, unless they're eating a lot of red meat and dairy specifically, which again only has small amounts, just a few percent of the total calories are coming from trans fat, but it has a significant amount of saturated fat. And we know that saturated fat, the more saturated fat you give somebody, we have tons of nutritional scientific trials to show this, the more saturated fat you give somebody, the more you can throw their blood sugar out of control, because you're creating insulin resistance. Saturated fat isn't driving up their blood sugar, it's fat, right? Fat can't drive up your blood sugar. What it's doing is it's driving up the insulin resistance that prevents insulin from basically acting like a lock and key, right? Insulin's like a key. It goes to each of the cells in our bodies. Take a muscle cell, for instance. Muscles use a lot of glucose, right? It goes to our muscle cells and it acts like a key, and it basically it says, yo, we got a lot of sugar in the blood. I'm ready to give it to you. And so the insulin kind of unlocks the door through this signaling pathway, and it gets this glucose transporter to come to the surface of the cell so that the blood sugar can get out of the bloodstream and into the body cells. And when we have too much saturated and trans fat in our diet, the insulin can't do its job, and our body can't get sugar out of the bloodstream and into the body cells. That's not a problem of carbohydrate excess. That's not a problem of eating too many carbohydrates. That's a problem of eating too much saturated fat that specifically stems from our standard American diet that's rich in meat and dairy and eggs. And of course, I'm not just going to demonize those foods. We also have to talk about all of the processed junk foods, the food that I call crap, calorie rich and processed foods. That's an acronym, crap. Too much of that calorie rich and processed food that's driving our insulin resistance, which that is the problem that's driving out of control blood sugar levels and that's driving diabetes. It's the insulin resistance. It's not consuming carbohydrate. Now, again, high fructose corn syrup, sugar, and white flour, we are never promoting those foods. Those forms of carbohydrate are also going to make diabetes worse, in addition to saturated fat and those, sort of meat, dairy, and eggs and other sort of animal-based foods. and other processed foods. But all those processed forms of carbohydrate are not good and are not going to solve the problem. The things that will are the whole plant foods, which we've already talked about throughout the whole course of this presentation.
Yeah.
Legumes, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, and throw in mushrooms too. We lump those in with vegetables, but they're actually a fungus. That may sound gross to people, but we know mushrooms, they taste good. They can be used as a meaty texture in a lot of different dishes, and they are incredible for our health. And so we want to throw many mushrooms into our diet if possible also.
Yeah, for sure. I have one more question. I know we're going a little long on time, but I did want to ask and talk about, are there any points in the life cycle when you might recommend somebody getting more protein, or when somebody should be concerned about their protein? For example, infants and kids, elders, pregnancy, lactation, because, that might be a concern for some people.
Exactly. Great question. I'm really glad you brought it up, Tony. Yes, there are certain parts of our life cycles. Think about when we're growing as children, and then think about when we're declining in age as seniors, and our risk for a lot of different diseases is getting higher as we get older. Our protein, we definitely need to be more concerned with protein. It's not so much that our protein needs are much higher than they are in other points of life, but we want to make sure we're getting enough, right? When we reach adulthood and we've already kind of we're not going to grow any taller. Yes, we can put on muscle, and hopefully people are doing some resistance training, because all of the muscle that we can gain during our younger years or middle-aged years, when we tend to have less risk for a lot of problems that come with older advanced age, or when we're seniors, if we can put on more muscle mass, that's going to protect us against a number of different problems as we get older. Because we know older people, right? Their appetites tend to decrease, and their muscle mass tends to decrease, and all these and their capacity to exercise tends to decrease, because they're dealing with chronic pain. They've got a bad back. They've got osteoarthritis. They've got all this pain in their hands and their knees and their ankles and all their different joints. And so that's preventing them or discouraging them from keeping up a regular exercise routine, which can help them to maintain that muscle mass that we need. And so, yes, seniors definitely. But nonetheless, if you're a senior who's following the kinds of habits that we're talking about right now, and you're consuming a variety of mostly whole plant foods, right? And you're reducing the amount of sugar, which sugar doesn't have any protein, right? It's just carbohydrate. Or you're reducing the amount of oil in your diet, because oil, it's just fat. It doesn't have any protein in it. And so we're reducing these highly processed foods, and we're eating mostly whole plant foods, which all have some amount of protein, concentrating on the beans and the high protein nuts and seeds and the dark leafy greens. Seniors aren't going to have anything to worry about, right? Just like little kids, if they're eating a lot of those foods. But it can be a challenge, right? Some seniors, especially if they haven't adopted these habits when they were in their younger years, when they were healthier and their digestive systems were more robust, their bodies were more robust, they may say, yo, Gabriel, man, I get it. I'm supposed to eat more beans and the dark leafy greens, but I get all this bloating, and I have all this intestinal upset, and I have all this discomfort in my stomach, and I get all this gas, man. That's not working out for me. And so for those people, I'd say, again, beans should be a cornerstone of everybody's diet. But if you're having trouble with any of these particular plant foods, whether it's broccoli's giving you a lot of, bloating and gas, or whether it's black beans or chickpeas, you got to go slow. But if you do it regularly, it's all about consistency. Again, practice makes perfect. Just like developing a palate for these foods, if you want your gut to develop the capacity to digest them with efficiency, you have to regularly incorporate these foods so that the gut lining, and so that our microbiome, all of our gut bugs have a chance, have exposure to these foods on a daily basis, right? So if you can't eat beans, I guarantee you can eat one spoonful of beans. So start with one spoonful, open up a can of beans. You don't even have to cook them. Buy a can of no salt added or low sodium beans at any grocery store. You can find them anywhere. We just want to get the low sodium or the no salt added varieties, popping them open and eating one spoonful today. And then I eat one spoonful again tomorrow. And I want you to do that for at least 7 to 10 days. Eat one spoonful. And then next week, go up to 2 spoonfuls and do that for a week or two. And if you do it slow and you do it consistently, meaning you give your gut a chance to get exposed to these things on a daily basis, I guarantee you can develop an ability to digest them with more ease. Now, I'm not saying you're not going to have any gas. Part of breaking down a lot of this high fiber food is the bacteria that break down these fibers in our large intestine. They're doing all these wonderful things for our health. And so we need them to be digesting these fibers. They're producing these things called short chain fatty acids like butyrate, and acetate, and propionate. And these things have all these wonderful health benefits that we can get into in another podcast. But I'm telling you, you can't live without the fiber, because all these wonderful things are going on in our bodies when we eat all this fiber. And of course, but a byproduct of that digestion of those bacteria chewing on and digesting that fiber is a little bit of gas. So sometimes you have a little bit of gas, but I guarantee you it's going to decrease. The quantity will decrease, and certainly the bloating and discomfort will decrease over time when you're consuming them on a regular basis, because you're going to allow every type of bacteria is picky, right? Just like us, bacteria have certain things that they like to eat, and the bacteria are eating the different types of fiber that come in all these whole plant foods. That's their preferred fuel of choice. And every type of bacteria likes different kinds of fiber, right? You'll have certain bacteria that love the fiber from broccoli. You'll have certain bacteria that love the fiber from black beans. Well, in order to have enough of those bacteria in your gut to break down the fiber in that beans with efficiency and ease, you got to eat it regularly, right? Because if I don't eat black beans for 5 years, I'm not going to have many of those good bugs in my gut that are going to help me break down those beans. I got to eat them on a regular basis. Again, tons of variety, and we got to do it every day. You know, our health is our greatest wealth. We can't expect to just have health without putting in any work. It doesn't have to be hard. We don't have to spend all day doing these things. Like I say, it's as easy as buying a can of beans and opening it up and putting a little bit in a soup, or eating a little bean burger, or putting a few of those white beans like we talked about in your morning smoothie, when you're masking those flavors with blueberries and kale or spinach, and maybe some dates, throwing some dates because they're super sweet and they add that wonderful sweet flavor to your smoothie, and a banana and avocado, whatever people might like to put in there. You're going to mask the flavor of those beans, but you're going to chop them up real good in the blender. So it's going to make them easier to digest. Again, there's so many different ways to get beans into your diet, but you got to start doing it on a daily basis, and your body will thank you for it. I guarantee it. And so will your energy levels.
I'm really glad you added that in too, because I do hear that a lot. It's like, I love to go vegan, but I get too bloated. I can't handle beans. Like
it's just like exercise, right? Nobody, people don't think about nutrition like they think about exercise. But hey, people, if I'm a couch potato, who's going to think that I'm going to be a successful marathon runner tomorrow? Right? Nobody.
Right.
I'm going to go out there and I'm going to run around the block and I'm going to feel horrible. I'm going to be gasping for air. My knees and my feet are going to be killing me. We don't become successful exercisers or athletes overnight. These are things that take, in the case of athletes, right, it takes months, if not years, to get really good at an individual sport or physical activity. Now, I'm not saying you got to take months or years to get good at nutrition, but there's going to be an adjustment process, right? Yeah. It's not going to happen overnight. Some people do, don't get me wrong. And you know this, Tony. People will adopt a plant-based diet. Their energy levels will go through the roof. They'll sleep better, and they'll feel better than they ever have in their life. And they never look back. And then there's other people who say, oh my God, I just can't deal with all the fiber. I get the bloating and discomfort. There's other people who, like you noted earlier, will say, oh, but my energy levels are just no good. Guess what? The number one people don't have energy on a plant-based diet isn't because there's something magical in meat or dairy or eggs that gives you a lot of energy. No. Part of it's psychological, for one. Sometimes people just go through withdrawal symptoms. Hey, you stop smoking cigarettes, you feel like crap, excuse the word, but it's true, right? Because you're dealing with withdrawal symptoms. The chemicals, food is just chemicals, just like the smoke that you smoke in cigarettes is just chemicals, right? It's chemicals that stimulate different things in our body. And so when our body goes from eating these chemicals on a regular basis to all of a sudden getting none of those chemicals in your steak or your McDonald's hamburger, you might have some withdrawal symptoms, and that might manifest in the form of low energy levels. It doesn't really mean you have low energy or that your body doesn't have any strength to go walk around the block or to go, cook a meal in the kitchen. It means you're dealing with withdrawal symptoms, and those will go away if you just stay away from those foods for a few more days or a couple more weeks, right? You just have to give your gut and your body a chance to get over those withdrawal symptoms and to start to adapt to your new way of eating. That being said, if somebody feels weak on a plant-based diet, well, hey, if on the transition process, if you're an ethical vegan, that's one thing. You're just going to have to deal with a little bit of withdrawal and give your gut a chance to adjust to this new diet, all this fiber that you're consuming, for instance. But if you're not an ethical vegan, and you feel, oh, I'm so depleted. Okay, well then go from eating meat 7 days a week to eating meat 1 or 2 days a week, and then before you know it, you'll be eating it once a month. And then before you know it, you won't be eating it at all. And then you'll still be getting a little mid amounts of meat here and there that'll help prevent you from feeling like, oh, I just can't go forever without eating meat, or I just feel lethargic, or I just feel like there's something missing in my diet if I don't get the meat. It's not that something's missing. Again, it's just that your gut has been accustomed to eating these foods for many decades for most people, right? And so the gut needs a chance to adjust to this new way of eating and absorbing nutrients from these new and different foods. And there was one other point I was going to make about that. The number one reason when people transition to a plant-based diet may have these feelings of lower energy levels or not having enough strength is because they're not eating enough food. Plant-based foods are naturally calorically dilute. And what that means is they're lower in calorie density, right? And what that means is to standardize this, and I can show this image. You've seen this image a million times, that calorie density chart that I have that helps people visualize this. If you take a pound of any given food, right? Now, I'm not going to eat a pound of olive oil, probably not at least, but this is just a way to standardize it. If I eat a pound of any food, I get a certain amount of calories in that pound. And more calorie dense foods have more calories per pound of food. So a pound of olive oil has 4,000 calories, whereas a pound of any average vegetable has only about 100 calories, right? So way less calories. And on average, plant-based foods are lower in calories than are animal-based foods. And so people will put the same amount of food on their plate when they're making a plant-based meal, and they'll say, well, this is the amount of food that I've always eaten on my standard American diet. And so I don't know why I'm having so much energy. I'm feeling hungry all the time, or they may not even feel hungry all the time because most people are overweight or obese. And so a lot of them, maybe they're just they're just utilizing a lot of that excess energy by burning off some of that extra fat, which happens for most people when they go on a plant-based diet. It's a great side effect of plant-based diets. We're naturally eating less calories, and so we're going to burn off some of that excess body fat that's not good for our health. But nonetheless, if we eat the same amount of food on a plant-based diet that we did on a standard American or more of an animal-based diet, we're going to be getting way fewer calories. So people simply eating more food will help you with your energy levels and help to prevent from feeling depleted or feeling like you don't have enough energy, like you don't have enough strength. You have to eat more. It took me a couple of months on a plant-based diet where I was losing weight. Now I felt pretty good. I wasn't having horrible energy levels or anything, but I was just losing weight. And that's because I had to learn from real life experience that I had to start eating a lot more food in order to maintain my weight, and in order certainly to make sure that I had consistent energy levels during the day. And I wasn't feeling like, 1 or 2 hours after I eat, I'm famished, man. I just feel out of energy, or I just feel so hungry. Well, it's because I wasn't eating enough, right? So I had to by 1.5 times or double the amount of oatmeal that I was eating in the morning, or the amount of rice and beans that I was eating for lunch, right? We can afford to eat large portions.
So for folks who are focusing on weight loss, again, a high protein diet is not, because that's another way people go, like, I'm trying to lose weight, so it's all about the protein right now. But
exactly.
Really, what we need to focus on is the fiber
misguided.
and the water. Yeah.
Misguided, right? Yes, it's fiber and water, or those high fiber, high water, whole plant foods, which are naturally low in calories or calorie dilute, are going to be the most effective way that we can manage our body weight.
Thanks for sharing all of that. Kind of just in wrapping it up, we've spent lots of time talking about protein, and lots of other great conversations came into it. Just to wrap it up, do you have any key takeaways that you want to share with people regarding protein?
Great question, Tony. I mean, I think we've hit the nail on the head with this thing, but key takeaways are always good because it gives people some kind of brings everything together in a succinct way. Like I've said before, concentrate on eating whole plant foods. And when possible, when you've got the motivation, when it works in your budget, when you've got the ideas to do it, incorporate as much variety as possible. People, and also most importantly, you don't need to stress about protein, especially when you're eating lots of whole plant foods, and specifically when you're concentrating on those real big bang for your buck protein sources from the plant-based kingdom. Your legumes, number one, your high protein nuts and seeds, and specifically hemp seeds when possible. But again, any nut and seed is great. And then your dark leafy greens are just nutritional powerhouses in general. And then other cruciferous veg that's similar to dark leafies. It also has those dark colors like, cabbage, purple cabbage, and broccoli, things like that. And so if you're concentrating on those food groups, adding in fruits and whole grains as well for their great nutritional profiles, for the fiber and all the other wonderful nutrients that they have, there's really no reason to worry about protein. When we're reaching to these whole plant foods as the foundation of the most healthy way to eat, we really have nothing to worry about when it comes to protein. And that's also going to cover all of our other nutrient needs, excluding things like B12, which I'm sure you've spoken about in another podcast. That's not something specific to vegans, but otherwise, you're going to get pretty much everything you need from a varied whole food plant-based diet, and you're not going to need to worry about protein. And I hope we gave people some good examples. There's so many different ways, and we know that now more than ever, there's so many options, whether it's the plant-based eating program from one of my favorite organizations, Animal Protection of New Mexico, or it's the hundreds of other great places online that you can find quality nutrition information, and you can find great recommendations for how to put it into practice, which is the most important thing. We can know all the facts in the world, but if we don't put them into practice, they mean nothing. It's about executing it on a regular or a daily basis, where all these things tend to have are going to have a cumulative and a significant impact on our health. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. What a wealth of information this episode has become. Really appreciate you. Thanks again. And I definitely, look forward to having you on again in the future.
All right, man. Take care. Hi to the family. Hope you guys are doing well.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Thanks for joining us. We release new episodes every 2 weeks. You can always email us at plantbased@apnm.org. Check out our website, apnm.org/plantbased for classes, recipes, and more resources.
See you in 2 weeks.